Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining Faith in Public Life Action for our third Coffee at the Capitol series. Each week, we join together in discussion with faith leaders, community leaders, and movement partners to dive deeper into the core values of our faithful agenda and learn more about specific policies we can support to advance justice for our communities. And today, we're here to talk about pandemic relief for all. And I'm so excited to be joined by some of my favorite colleagues and partners to work with. So thank you for joining here with us. And as folks are joining the Facebook Live, please say hi in the chat. We'd love to know who's joining us. Feel free to share your congregation, your organization, and where you're joining from, and maybe how you're feeling today. We'd love to be together in community. And before we dive deep into this conversation, I want to take a moment to lament the tragic loss of precious life that we've witnessed over the past week as a result of gun violence and white supremacy. While the work of justice is long and taxing, I pray that each of you are finding ways to connect with community and are finding spiritual nourishment to sustain you in this hard time. We can't do this work alone, for it is too heavy to carry ourselves. And it is only together in solidarity that we can overcome hate, oppression, and injustice. So I'd like to offer a moment of silence for all the lives lost over this past week, remembering that they were people loved by God and loved by their communities. Thank you. So as we move forward, we'll keep these people in our hearts. In February, Faith in Public Life Action launched our Faithful Agenda, which outlines our values and what we hope the Biden administration and Congress will prioritize in their first 100 days. As people of faith driven by dignity, values of love for our neighbor, and justice, we are advocating for policies that center our communities, meet our needs, reflect the values of our faith, and remedy injustice. Our Faithful Agenda includes justice for Black communities and ending systemic racism, compassionate, effective pandemic relief for all, which we're talking about today, justice and dignity for LGBTQ people, dignity, family unity, and citizenship for immigrants, and building an inclusive democracy. And we know that S1, the For the People Act, has a hearing in Congress today in the Senate. We celebrate that. So we're thankful for everyone who has taken action with us over the past 2 months to ensure the Biden administration and Congress understands that the faith community is ready for big change rooted in justice for our communities. So let's move into today's topic. A few weeks ago, the Biden administration signed into law the American Rescue Plan, a robust COVID-19 package. This is a meaningful step toward providing critical relief amid the pandemic that will make a huge difference in people's lives. But we know the grave disparities existed among our communities before the pandemic, and they'll only be exacerbated because of this crisis unless we continue to take bold action. Communities of color, immigrants, and women have experienced disproportionate job loss and financial hardship. So this is truly an issue of gender and racial justice. Over the past year, I've been blown away by the faith community and all communities, the unprecedented ways that we have showed up for each other through mutual aid, protesting, community care, and more. But we know it is the job of Congress to make sustainable change to reform our systems that leave too many people behind. So today we're going to hear from some experts and organizers on how we can work for that long-term change. So I'm excited to pass the mic over to my friends here, and I'm going to ask, just to start, each person to introduce themselves and share just quickly what's a favorite show that you've watched during the pandemic, just to get started. Go ahead, Laura.
Sure. Thank you, Kelsey. This is inspiring to me. So glad to be here. My name is Laura Peralta Schulte. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm with Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice. And in terms of TV, I got to tell you, Kelsey, I've watched so much TV, all of which is very bad and highly romantic in terms of shows. So I don't want to disclose some of the bad stuff that I've watched, but maybe too much. So
no problem. Happy you're here, Laura. Thank you so much. Pass it to you, Vivian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vivian Chang with APALA, the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, I, she, her pronouns. I'll disclose, I've been watching iZombie which used to be on the CW, and I missed it the first time around, but it is on Netflix. And zombies, pandemics, very familiar, but it's a good show. It's really funny.
Thank you. All right, Reverend Nelson, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Dr. Joshua Nelson, and I'm a pastor in Southwest Georgia, 2 churches down there, Emmanuel Seventh-day Adventist Church and Calvary Seventh-day Adventist Church. And my shows that I've been binging, well, anything MCU, so Marvel Universe, obviously. So WandaVision was major for me, and of course now Falcon and Winter Soldier. So yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you all so much and for being here. And I also did not introduce myself. My name is Kelsey Herbert, and I'm the National Campaigns Director with Faith in Public Life and Faith in Public Life Action. Okay, let's get started. I'll start with you, Laura, again. We've been through so much this year. We had the census, we had an election, we've had countless obstacles. What do you think is one of the biggest lessons that we as advocates have learned during this pandemic?
Well, Kelsey, I am, again, so happy to be here. I think the lesson that we learned is exactly what you did today. And what I mean by that is when we organize collectively for justice, we make a difference. Because Kelsey, this bill was bold, it was big. We were scrapping for peanuts during the Trump administration, and this one really, it particularly, for the now, really helps a lot of families, and excited to talk to you about that.
Great. Vivian, what's something that you've learned during this year of advocacy?
Yeah, I think a big one that I've heard a lot is just we can't go back to normal. Normal didn't work for a lot of families, and there is a desire for improving, and we can, make that happen, just like we saw in the American Rescue Plan. So we just have to keep pushing for it.
Great. And Reverend Nelson, on the ground, what is something that you've learned in your advocacy and your community work?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I've learned is that you don't have to do every single thing in person. That you can actually advocate in the virtual space. Like, there's so many things you can do, even during a pandemic. And I think it taught us, I guess, in the faith community, how to truly be the church, like how to operate outside of the building, and truly do what we should have been doing anyways, which is outreach. And people thought, well, how can we do ministry now? How can we do outreach? It's like, duh, like, ministry happens outside. So, you can do it more now. So I think that definitely taught us a lot there. And also just being able to adjust, as a faith community, realize, kind of even understanding our identity as a church, like, is the church really needed still? Like, how do we become or remain relevant? Cutting the fat in our services, and just really thinking through, like, even, my preaching has changed in terms of like what I'm really preaching about and how I'm really centered on, just getting to the main point. So I think, it's just really, helped out in different ways in that respective, but it's also just brought us together. Even though we've been separated, it's also brought us together. And so I think that's, the bad, obviously, but there's some good that's come out of it as well.
Amen. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, we, as people of faith, we are not bound by the 4 walls of our places of worship. And that's thank you for that reminder. And that has been a lesson here. So I'm going to stay with you here, Reverend Nelson. What has been your experience working with families and people impacted by the pandemic? I worked with you on the census and saw all the work alongside the census that you were doing for outreach for people. So I'm curious, what changes and challenges have you witnessed among families in your community in Georgia, specifically in Albany, during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully we were able to really come together and help out those who needed help, in our church, and, people who are friends of our church and the community. But, I definitely think that it's been rough for a lot of people. I remember I was at our house, and I think this was the time when they were trying to get another stimulus package passed before this last election, and what we thought it was going to go through. And so she was just like so excited and so thankful. She was like, man, I really need this. I'm so, it's just kind of desperation. And when, I came to her door, she was like shouting and rejoicing, and of course it didn't pan out, and so we were able to help her. But I was like really thinking like, man, people are really, this is like a desperate time for people, they really are needing this. And and just especially the kid. Like I mentor, a lot of young men, and so these guys are just kind of, cooped up and not really sure how to, what to do, this whole long time not being in school and being around people and stuff. And so, it's really tough on a lot of people, and especially the kids. You could see that, and just some of them were doing well with the virtual learning, and some weren't, and some probably behind, because of it. So definitely those are the things that I kind of highlight. There's another question you asked me as well. Let's see.
No, I think that was it, just around like what the challenges that you're witnessing. So I think that you spoke to those, and yeah, thank you so much for, we rely on faith leaders to be those support and those trusted messengers. And so, yeah, thank you for all you're doing for your community in Georgia.
Yeah.
Great. So Laura, I want to invite you back. So we talked about the American Rescue Plan. We know it's not perfect. We know there's that was left out. Some compromises were made. So what can we celebrate about this package, and how will it make a difference in people's lives?
Kelsey, there is so much to celebrate in this package. So I just, and that really breaks my heart to hear Dr. Nelson speak about how people were so reliant on to meet their critical needs. But my message today is help is on the way. Help is on the way, because we are in a time with a new administration and a new Congress that the politics of no are making way for the politics of must do. And so I do want to bring a bit of rejoicing to the table, because we were able to get very, very clear wins in this bill, wins for people. And so maybe I'll take a few moments to talk through a couple of them, although it could be the whole show, of which we do not have time to talk through all of the particulars. I think most important is the safety net programs that folks rely on so much. So we were able to get increases in SNAP, along with a special increase in pandemic aid, because we know families are hungry, particularly when they're not working. Big victory. We know that childcare and the childcare economy has collapsed in the pandemic. So there are support for childcare in the bill to help families cope with the trauma. The question of broadband, broadband is important for health. It is important for school. We can't live in the 21st century in a situation where some people have access to broadband and others don't. That is a non-starter. So very important investments there. Very important investments in healthcare, including, Kelsey, the little known secret, we expanded the Affordable Care Act in this bill. So we had increases to Medicaid. We had greater assistance for folks in terms of supports. There are a group of people who made a little bit more than necessary for Medicaid, so they can't get Medicaid, but didn't make enough money to actually be able to afford health care on the Affordable Care Act. So there's new support now for families stuck in the middle that will help them people actually afford health care, heaven forbid, in a pandemic, the idea of people having health care. We had racial justice emphasized in the healthcare space with expansions to healthcare for moms, because we know that Black and Brown and Indigenous women died disproportionately from childbirth in the United States of America. Crazy. So all kinds of supports there. I think the most revolutionary support outside of cash assistance, which we're able to expand to larger numbers of mixed status families, is really the advance of refundable credits. And what do I mean by that? A little known secret, working class Americans are often taxed into poverty. It's ridiculous. People are so concerned about higher income folks paying more money in taxes. Well, low income workers, particularly young workers, 19 to 24, have been taxed into poverty for a long time. So we got a little expansion there so that low-income workers are no longer taxed into poverty. We also got, which I want folks to follow because this really goes to the next bill. We are one of the only countries in the world that doesn't provide kid cash when somebody has a child. And we know our child poverty rates in this country are horrible. And so innovation in this bill, not only did we expand the child tax credit to make it fully refundable, meaning for folks who've been locked out of it to now have access, but we are also working towards a monthly payment of cash if families want it. If they want it the old-fashioned way, fine. But this is a month, we're moving to a monthly payment so that moms and dads don't have to, or family members don't have to worry about where their rent is going to come from if they're lacking, how are they going to pay for food over the long term. It is innovation. And I know you wanted just briefly for me to discuss next plans. So let us celebrate the wins, but let us know that these are time limited. So what does that mean? This is relief. We are heading to recovery. And recovery means everybody who's listening right now, we got to double down because, there's a lot to fix in this country, as you said at the beginning of the show, Kelsey. These are not new problems. White supremacy has locked people out of housing, has locked Black and brown communities out of fresh water in so many circumstances. So we want to make sure that the issues that we were able to achieve in this bill become the basis for expansion in the next. We want healthcare for everybody. We cannot settle with a healthcare system that leaves behind millions of Americans. We cannot, or people living in the country. We want to lock in this kid cash so that it goes forward permanently, so families can plan. A lot of the things that were in this bill are things that we've been working for, as you know, a long time. This is all about racial equity and justice. This is to make our people whole. And so we celebrate now, but the work continues.
We celebrate now, but the work continues. Thank you, Laura. And we owe so much to Network Lobby for advancing these policies from the faith perspective. Network and other faith organizations, I see Network as a leader in this. So thank you, Laura, for your work. So important. Thank you for being here. All right, so I'd like to bring Vivian back in here. So we said there's lots to celebrate, but we have so far to go. So Vivian, I'm curious if you could speak to what were some of the gaps in the bill, and from Apollo's position and from your perspective, what do we need to continue pushing for?
Yeah, great questions, Kelsey. And I love what Laura said is like, we celebrate and we move forward. This work doesn't stop. So some things that, we're missing for a lot of folks in this country. I mean, a big one is undocumented immigrants, getting access to the same cash relief, right? There's 11 million undocumented folks in this country who, many of whom are our frontline workers, essential workers. They're, like picking the food that goes into all of our, groceries. And like, those are the folks that we clapped for at the beginning of the pandemic, but now they're left out. They're left out of this plan. So that's something that's really big, as well as just continued cash relief. $1,400 for more than a year pandemic is not enough, especially for folks facing eviction, folks facing just piling up bills. So that's something that, we see is like a really big need for that next package. Other things that folks saw, maybe have seen were left out, were a minimum wage increase. There's tons of folks who have been working throughout the pandemic. They're literally, keeping our economy running, and yet they can't afford to pay for childcare. They can't afford to pay for healthcare. And that is like literally a shame on our nation, So for us, it's, things like Raise the Wage Act, keep pushing for those kinds of bills. And if we're talking about, pandemic relief too, we need to talk about vaccine access, because it's so uneven around the country. I know a lot of folks watching this probably feel the same about like trying to sign up for an appointment, accessing this website. What we've seen for our members at Apollo, who are Asian American, Pacific Islander, a lot of them immigrants, those barriers are even higher because there's so little language access, there's so little supports. And so something that we see as a huge need is just that vaccine access equity, whether that's language access, whether it's supports, whether it's just technical assistance for folks. Those are some of the biggest things we're seeing. And so in terms of, what comes next, yes, bills like raise the wage, bills on language access, even things that the executive branch can do just to make sure that government agencies are really serving the folks, especially in such a high time of need. And for us, we're really looking at how do we bring this all under one umbrella? And for that one big thing is the Thrive agenda, which if folks aren't familiar with is focused on environmental justice, as well as good jobs, as well as relief for Black, Brown, Indigenous communities. So that's what we're looking at.
Great, thank you. And you spoke a bit with the vaccine distribution and accessibility. I'm wondering if you could speak to other ways that the pandemic has uniquely impacted the AAPI community.
Yeah, thank you for asking. What folks have said, which applies to a lot of communities of color, is it's a pandemic within a pandemic. So a lot of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, they're facing, on top of the health impacts, shuttered businesses, anti-Asian violence, which we've seen spike so recently, and just generally like experiencing racism in all the ways that people are already being impacted. So, folks are facing a harder time getting their jobs. Like unemployment has spiked, massively among the API population, as well as just folks facing barriers to healthcare or facing just like, racism on the street. So that's what we're seeing, as well as, disproportionately, for example, Pacific Islanders are vulnerable to COVID-19 because of lack of access to healthcare, because of just being overlooked in a lot of data and a lot of reporting. So it's grim, but it's also something that we know we have to just keep staying connected to our communities, keep fighting with them on the front lines, because this has always been the way that things happen, right? It doesn't happen evenly for everyone, so we just have to make sure we dedicate double the efforts for the most impacted communities.
Absolutely, and that's when we have conversations on equity and not necessarily moving beyond equality, knowing that it is a pandemic within a pandemic. Not everyone has been impacted the same, and so we need to pay attention to the unique ways that women, that immigrants, that people of color, that AAPI communities are impacted. So thank you for sharing that with us so much, Vivian. Okay, as we start to wrap up, I want to invite Reverend Nelson to come back and to offer us kind of a prophetic, encouraging word. We have things that we can celebrate. We know that the work is not done. We've been through a very challenging, I would say, week, but then I look back to this year, and I look at the year before, and then I also look at the decade before. It's a long road. It's not been easy, but in community, we can do this together. So Reverend Nelson, if you could, what words do you have for us as we move forward in the weeks to come, in the months to come?
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. I want to say to the last question, I'm just really excited about the relief for Black farmers. That's really an exciting thing that is coming from that rescue plan. But I really want to just thank you, Kelsey, and Vivian, and others who have put this together, and just for what you guys are doing, and for the women on here today. You are women's history, and so I'm really thankful for each of you, and excited about the work that you're doing and you'll continue to do. And I want to just give just a very quick charge. I was reading the what we call the Lord's Prayer, and it's really not the Lord's Prayer. It's really the prayer that the Lord taught the disciples, and that's often how we view it in my in my thinking, in terms of this is the prayer that He's asking me to pray. And when we read that prayer, as we all famously know this prayer, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. And then there's that part in verse 10 that says, your kingdom come, your will be done. I really want us to remember that this is a prayer for justice. It's a prayer that's asking God for His kingdom to come. That is the solution. Ultimately, as faith individuals, we believe that there is hope in God, and that there is hope on the horizon. As a Christian, we believe that Christ is that hope, and that His kingdom is coming and has already come. And so with that reality, we are the kingdom. We are living in the kingdom. We have to be examples of the kingdom. And when we pray that prayer, we're praying for His will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. We want what God's ideals are in heaven to be what we see and experience in justice here on earth. But we may ask the question, what is the will of God? How do you know the will of God? And as we read further on in Matthew 7, it really explains to us that if you don't do the will of God, you're really not going to make it in the kingdom. So it behooves us to really understand what is the will of God. But we know the will of God. A lot of people want to pray these prayers and say, and if it's his will, well, we know what his will is. We know his will is for us to learn to do good and seek justice, to correct oppression and to bring justice to the fatherless, right? We know his will for those who have been downtrodden. We know his will. We know that his will is for us to walk humbly with our God, right? Like Micah 6:8 says, we know his will. His will is for us to let justice to roll down as waters. We know his will. We know his will is for us to open our mouths for the speechless and speak out for the cause of those who are being oppressed, to speak justice and righteousness. We know God's will. And so as we are praying this prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It really is a call for justice. It's a call for us to pray intentional prayers, to continue the good fight, not to give up, to continue to be the kingdom, to be what I like to say, many outposts of the kingdom here on this earth, that people may experience justice. They may experience righteousness as they experiencing you and your call to action, that they may experience God, that we keep being, this is the chart, that we keep being the kingdom, that we keep standing for the downtrodden, that we keep shouting for the speechless, that we keep marching for the marginalized, that we keep being the hands and the feet of God. This is our charge, and this is what we have to continue to do. No matter who is in office, we have to keep fighting the fight, because at the end of the day, we're not here for a party, we're here for the kingdom. And when we are the kingdom, we're here for the people. And so I just want to encourage you with that today. Remember that today and pray that prayer today, as God will use you to do extraordinary things as he has already done. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Nelson, for that inspiring word. Yeah, we are not alone. We have community, and we have our faith to sustain us in this time. And we have not been left without guidance. We know what the will of God is, and it is for justice and for all people to be included, for all people to flourish. So thank you for that really timely, important reminder. So just to wrap up, we are in the final days of Women's History and Gender Equality Month. And in February, we wrapped up Black History Month. But I saw the calls all over Instagram and social media say every month is Black History Month. We do not need to limit our learning, our supporting, our allyship, and our awareness around different months. I believe in April or May is AAPI History Month. And so I just invite us all to reconsider, to honor these months, but also that we can move beyond these months. So as we wrap up Women's History Month, I do want to, make a point about equity and how we, our policies as we're moving forward our faithful agenda and the COVID-19 packages, considering how women, how non-binary people, how trans people are uniquely impacted by the policies that we're advocating for, to be mindful of that moving forward as we continue to be mindful of how Black communities are impacted, how AAPI communities are impacted. And so we'll carry all of this with us as we're advocating for our faithful agenda. And we are not limited by months of the year, but we are in solidarity with each other every day moving forward, considering how these issues are intersectional and how in solidarity is how we move forward and how justice is found. So we're in these last few days, and so let's continue celebrating all people as we continue to push for these policies. So I just want a few calls to action and a few examples of where we need to consider once funding is given to programs through the American Rescue Plan, how we can continue advocating even now. For example, harm reduction. A lot of money was given for harm reduction in this package, but how will these funds be distributed? We want to make sure that funds are distributed to real on the ground harm reductionists, people who are serving the community, mostly by people who use drugs themselves and who are most effective in distributing. So once funding is given, we also need to pay attention to how that funding is being distributed. So there's going to be a link in the chat to learn more about the National Campaign for Harm Reduction Funding, which is an issue area priority for Faith in Public Life and Faith in Public Life Action. So please consider, once we have these bills, even within the bill, our work is not done as we continue to look forward. And there will also be a call to action for you to call your member of Congress to tell them that undocumented immigrants must be included in the next relief plan. Undocumented immigrants are people with full dignity who are fully integrated members of our communities and societies who deserve relief as well. So I invite you to learn more about how we can equitably distribute funding for harm reduction and how we can advocate alongside our undocumented neighbors to ensure that they get the relief that they need also in this time. So I want to thank all of you for your time and for being here, those who have joined on Facebook Live, for our amazing, inspiring, inspire our speakers. And I want to remind us that next week we will be together again to have a conversation on our Faithful Agenda tenet of citizenship for all immigrants. So next Wednesday, noon, we'll be back here on Facebook Live, noon Eastern. And I thank you all for your time and for your witness and your continued advocacy and teaching us all so much. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day.